most important game of the 2025 season, and he named Alabama as Georgia's most important game of the 2025 season for obvious reasons. It's a big time top 10 matchup in Athens and all that. But it's so difficult to truly pinpoint what Georgia's most important game is, because that most important I don't think is the same thing as biggest game. If I was saying Georgia's biggest game of the 2025 season, I think it's Texas. I think Texas is likely to be a top 5 team when they come into Athens in late November next year. But I believe it was Chuck Oliver. If you're a 680 The Fan listener in Atlanta, Chuck Oliver, I believe he said years ago, like, because people talk about must-win games, and it's like every game is a must-win game, because try losing those other games that aren't must-win games, and that's what it is when you look at Georgia's schedule. Like, yeah, Bama is a massive game, and just think about kind of what the storyline is, just from a narrative perspective. Like, Georgia loses to Alabama, it's Bama owns Kirby. It doesn't matter. Nick Saban, Kalen DeBoer, they own Kirby, and Georgia's got 31 game home winning streak. Also, to lose a game at home, haven't lost at home since 2019. So to have the winning streak, 31 straight games, I think it'll be 33 most likely with the two cupcakes to start the season. So Georgia's going to get that winning streak up to 33 straight home games. And I mean, losing to Bama at home would just be devastating. Kirby Smart has yet to play Alabama in Athens, Georgia. As crazy as that is, he's played Alabama 7 times, and not one time has it been in Athens, Georgia. So Georgia needs to return the favor of that loss a year ago that Alabama gave them. But then you think about Ole Miss, and Ole Miss is kind of the same thing. And also, I feel like Ole Miss is a worse team than Alabama in 2025. So it's kind of the same type thing. Now Ole Miss has beaten you 2 years in a row. Now Lane Kiffin, Kirby Smart, this little rivalry of former Saban disciples, and the offensive guy beat Kirby for a second straight year. Like, that would be a terrible narrative to sit with. How about think about Georgia losing to Tennessee? How would that make you feel as a Georgia Bulldog fan? Heupel's first win over Georgia. Like, you've won 8 straight games over Tennessee. At some point, that's going to end. And the tangible, like, stepping stone that would be for Tennessee's program, like, yeah, they've beaten Alabama a couple times, and that's the best thing that Heupel has to hang his hat on. But you were also beating Alabama as they were getting worse and no longer winning championships. Then this different team that's on your schedule every year emerged that started winning championships. And that would be just so massive of a win for Josh Heupel in Tennessee. 3rd game of the season too. It's really Georgia's first big game. So you're 2-0 if you go into that one, most likely. But you're essentially starting 0-1 if you lose to Tennessee. But at Tennessee is one of the more reasonable spots to lose. But I think Tennessee fans have gotten loud enough on social media and other places without beating Georgia. A loss of the Vols, we don't want that. And then Auburn is kind of the same story. They definitely don't have the under Hugh Freeze, they don't have the track record that Josh Heupel has at this point. 2 double-digit win seasons. That's what would make it even worse. Georgia's also beaten Auburn 8 straight times. And if Hugh Freeze is able to get him, that's one of Hugh Freeze's like first, signature wins of his tenure at Auburn. So you can't lose to Auburn. So that's got to be an important game. We talk about Georgia Tech game. Like, Georgia Tech took Georgia to 8 overtimes. I should say Georgia took Georgia Tech to 8 overtimes, because I don't know how Georgia ended up pulling that one out. So there is the aspect that Georgia Tech does tend to play Georgia better as opposed to in Bobby Dodd. But I mean, with how that game go, it's definitely, that Georgia Tech to beat 8-6 to them in 2024. Maybe Georgia's not quite as good in 2024 as well. So it's that's another angle, and it's just embarrassing to lose to Georgia Tech. Like that's going to come off as disrespectful to the Yellow Jackets, but you can't be losing to Georgia Tech. So like, is that the most important game of 2025? Probably not, because it doesn't impact conference standings. But and then I haven't even gotten to the Gators. The Florida is Georgia's number one rival in my book. Like, as far as I'm concerned, there's no one that I value more than the Florida game. And this would be Napier's first win over Georgia. Georgia won 7 out of 8 against Florida. Like, not only would this be just a massive win for Napier, like, does this also mean maybe Florida's on the rise? Maybe Florida's turning into a college football playoff team. Like, Georgia had the toughest schedule in college football last year, with Auburn and Florida being bad teams. Like, Auburn and Florida aren't going to be bad teams forever. At some point, if Florida improves, and if that's this year, like, that becomes the most important game. So I named all those games, and haven't even mentioned Texas, who's, likely to be the number one team in the country. Like, maybe not from my perspective, but it's possible. There's going to be buzz about them being the number one team in the country. So likely a top 5 team at the very least. It could be a top 5 matchup with Georgia and Texas late in the season. And it's like, a top 5 matchup in November has to be the most important game of your season, right? Like, normally it would be, because that would be an essentially a semifinal to get to the SEC championship, and ultimately, try to win it and try to win a college football, try to go to the playoff and win a national title. But now it's like, okay, it'll determine the team that goes to the conference championship most likely, but maybe the team that doesn't gets a 6 seed in the playoff, gets a 7 seed in the playoff, and they're sitting pretty. And that, I think that's just what this college football playoff has done to the regular season. So I think ultimately I did a lot of talking, a lot of hemming and hawing over here, but I think I agree with Mark Schleybaugh. The Alabama game is without a doubt the most important game of the season. It's not only because it's at home, it's as early as it is. So to have a loss, and that's how I feel about Tennessee. Like, you lose to Tennessee or Alabama, obviously 2 of the tougher opponents you'll play all season, but also both of those are the 3rd and 4th game of the season this year. It's like, you lose one of those games, you're putting yourself behind the 8 ball a little bit. So, and on top of that, like, Kirby's got to get over this Alabama thing. And if Alabama is able to beat Georgia this year in Athens, now it starts to feel like, man, maybe Kirby Smart really just has some sort of mental block about the Alabama Crimson Tide, and he can't beat them. Like Pedro Martinez said, you just got to bend over and call the Yankees his daddies. Like, hopefully Kirby Smart doesn't offer that soundbite to the Alabama Crimson Tide fans. But yeah, I think that is the biggest game of the season. I think that a win like that early in the season just makes you feel good, especially, if it's Gunnar Stockton, if it's Ryan Puglisi, it's going to be a pretty inexperienced quarterback's best win of his career, most likely, unless if they beat Tennessee and Alabama, and they're sitting at 4-0, which is definitely possible as well. So yeah, I think Georgia's got to get over that Alabama game and start the season, I would say, at worst 3-1. If they're starting 2-2, this season could get a little interesting.